you want to work with me later on figuring out how to get you able to start the recording, we can figure that out.
Sounds good. All right. Hey, everyone. Looks like we've got 2 items on the agenda today. One is about status for Istio objects, and the other about multi-cluster Istio cuddle analyze. If you have anything else, please add to the agenda so we can allocate some time for it. Just want to give a reminder that let's see, how much time do we have left? The 1.24 release code freeze is October 21st, so that's about 4-ish weeks away. So if that's surprising to you and you had something you wanted in 1.24 that is going to take more than 4 weeks, you're advised. I think Ian put this on, but wanted me to discuss it because he's not here. So I'm not the expert on this, but hopefully I can at least explain it and we can make some progress on it. So the basic idea is that we have been adding status to Istio objects to make it easier to debug things, especially with ambient. We want to kind of make kind of the newer stuff have nice status messages aligned with what Kubernetes and especially Gateway API are doing. So we added recently the first status message, which is on service and service entry, which says whether the object was attached to a waypoint or not. Actually, it doesn't say it wasn't unless you tried to and failed, because you don't want to write to every service. So that will say something like, you labeled the namespace use waypoint, and then it will say on all the services, this is attached to this waypoint because the namespace label or something along those lines. What we're seeing, though, is for some of the other objects we're starting to look at, there's some more complications. So we want to say similar on authorization policy, like this authorization policy was successfully bound to this waypoint, or maybe it wasn't successfully bound to the Z-tunnel because it has L7 policies, things like that. The problem, though, is that authorization policies have multiple target refs. So there's kind of at a very high level of choice of like, do we have one condition that is the summary of all of them, or do we have a condition per target? And there's some prior art. I feel like it's early, but maybe I've been a bit out of the loop there, so maybe I'm wrong, of having this kind of ancestor comment or context in the Gateway API, where you kind of have a list of conditions that one for each target ref. I don't know how mature that is, though. I've definitely seen like the doc, but I don't know if anyone's using it yet, if it's fully stable or whatnot.
It's been around for a little while now, like 9 months or so maybe, but it's basically been relegated to backend TLS policy, which has had its own kind of friction.
Yeah. I do have some slight concern about adopting it, and then because we're adopting onto V1 APIs, whereas no one else has it on V1, we've been burned by that a bit in the past. But also, we do want to solve this problem soon, so it's a tricky conundrum. So I think that fully explains the problem. Unless I missed something, Mike, you may know if there's some other context here we should know.
I think it's a well-known problem for which we don't have a mature solution yet over in Gateway API or anywhere else. So, like the ancestor policy thing, I haven't fully wrapped my head around whether like ancestor is the right word, just because of the like relational targeting. I think I see Shane in the call. Maybe he has more input on this as well.
I'm with you. It's,
okay.
No, I'm with you. It's in a very, we're just kind of floating this out there stage, and we haven't really gotten a ton of feedback on it. I would say I've heard no feedback on it.
Gotcha. But we definitely do need a solution for this problem, both in Istio now, as well as eventually at some point in Gateway, especially if we ever want to do like auth policy in Gateway. So if we have better ideas, I don't think that's a terrible thing to try to figure out, but I'm happy to like shed some concepts on this stuff. I've done a lot of work with status. I don't have an immediate better proposal though.
Yeah. I am wondering like how much we really need the list right now. I mean, the main benefit of the pulse of the status for OCE policy is the Z-tunnel one, which isn't a list because it doesn't use target refs. So it's, I mean, because if we can defer this, then it becomes easier, right?
Yeah, yeah. And what we have so far for like a design doc for this is that Aussie status doc, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're unfortunately missing quite a few people on this call. So we can maybe just park some of this context and revisit when we have some more people, unless there's any other comments people have. All right. We can go ahead to the next one then. Anirban, looks like you're here. Feel free to take the mic.
Yep, thanks, John. So, hey, folks, sort of looking to get consensus from this group on a change that I'm introducing in this PR about accepting multiple cube contexts with Istio. So, to set some context about this, the multi-cluster service analyzer that we have today as part of the Istio analyze command uses the remote secrets in the cluster to connect to the remote clusters for analyzing them. A couple of issues with this would be that firstly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the intended use of these secrets seem to be for STOD only, since these secrets may have enhanced or elevated permissions. Secondly, this approach is not very extensible for certain cases. For example, I was looking into an use case where the user's kubeconfig had a proxy URL field set to connect to the clusters, and since Istio being run from the dev workstation was using the remote secrets, the connections to the cluster could not be established. This is just one example, but my point is that there can be other types of customizations in the developer's kubeconfig that could differ from the secrets created during the multi-cluster mesh setup. So that's a bit of a background into the problem. What I'm trying to change here is that instead of using secrets to create kube clients for the remote clusters, we get the input from the user on the clusters they want analyzed, as well as how to connect to them in the form of cluster context stored in the kube config. Now, as I understand, we don't have this UX for Istio presently, which is why the reviewer on the PR suggested that I propose this to the working group first. One caveat with this is that the in-cluster analysis for multi-clusters may become complicated with this change, but then maybe we could fall back to the secrets-based approach for in-cluster analysis. And this change should most likely not affect single cluster analysis at all. But yeah, open to other suggestions or any comments.
One question I have, just very background clarification, is the current multi-cluster analysis only used for the Istio command line, or is it also used for the Istio analysis?
I believe it's only via the Istio command line.
Okay. So at a high level, what seems to make sense to me is that you would be able to default to the in-cluster ones maybe, but then override choose the local ones. What isn't clear to me is how we want to expose that though. Like, is it a Boolean flag and you either use all the ones in the cluster or all the local ones? Do you override on a per cluster basis? For this cluster, use the local ones. How do you know which ones to use of the kube config? I'm not entirely sure. I just skimmed through the PR this first time looking at it. So apologies if it's obvious there, but like I'm not entirely sure how even in the PR or how in our desired behavior, like a user specifies, let's say I have 10 clusters I need to connect to. How do they actually specify which 10 to connect to from the kube config? Or how do we want them to? That's I guess, a better question.
Yeah, I get your point. I guess, I mean, going by the PR, it's basically the kube config would contain only those 10 cluster configs, which may not be a realistic case, obviously. Another potential alternative could be to expose another flag, which takes a comma separated input of relevant cluster context. I mean, something like that. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah,
Benjamin.
It's tricky. I think the default of using all the context you have in your kube config is unsafe. Like I just looked at my kube config, it has like 80 clusters and a lot of them I should not be touching and messing with. I know that the analysis is read-only, but still that's like kind of it seems like a taboo to do. I've never seen a tool that does that. The like comma, the list of context names is probably reasonable. Although I do wonder, like you might want multiple files and then multiple contexts out of those files, and then we end up with a really complex API. I do think that Kubernetes has this thing where you can pass as one kube config multiple files, and the client Go has like a way to merge them, which we probably already implicitly support because we use their libraries. So maybe that would solve that problem.
Yeah, I could probably check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, it does also seem like I in my ideal world, you would somehow read the kube config and like match them up somehow. But I don't know that there's like a mapping that we have of the names, and like I don't know that we want to impose a mapping that the names match up or something. So that seems a little suspicious as well.
Just a suggestion. So what about like having a YAML interface for specifying where a kube config resides, like for every cluster?
Yeah, we could do that. We already have, I think, some support for like it's pretty rare. No one uses it, but like there's a kube config file. There's also an Istio config file, which we don't use much of today, but we could maybe start making more use of that. Like we haven't needed much of it because there's not that much config that's common, but for this case,
Yeah, we could set like a list of default contexts that are used for commands or something like that there.
I wasn't aware that we actually did this. So what this is an actual like kube API access secret we're storing in a cluster for every remote cluster?
Yeah.
And does it have like full privileges, I'm guessing, or like what are the
it's typically how you do it is you create that Istio reader service account, and then that has the scope privilege, and then you get the token for that, and then you stick it in the kube config.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So it should only have read access.
I think Niranjan, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of clarify something about that remote secret because it came up actually in like another discussion recently. So that remote secret, so this is kind of separate from like Istio CTL like analyze, but like that remote secret just needs to be created for that like cross cluster service and endpoint discovery to happen, right? Like I think I remember seeing something in like one of the pilot controllers. It watches specifically for that secret. I just wanted to make sure that my understanding of that was correct.
Yes.
Sorry, quick follow-up. So does that have to have a specific name or a specific label or specific format? Like,
I I believe the cluster name is derived from some part of the kubeconfig. I forget what. I don't know. It's somewhere in there. Somewhere in there defines the name, and that's what we use as the. I'd have to look at the code to remember exactly what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's as John says with the label as well, setting some multi-cluster annotation to true.
Yeah, so I guess what I feel and what I kind of already said and no one's disagreed, so maybe this is starting to drive to consensus, is that we would have the default, if you don't override anything, is to use the in-cluster ones, and then we have some new flag, I don't know, we'll call it multi-cluster kubeconfig, that will in some way, shape, or form have a list of configs. We can debate maybe on the PR or something, whether that's a YAML file, or you just pass a list of the context and it's in one file, or some other format. I'm not too worried about the format. I'm sure we can figure something out. And those are kind of your two options. Does that make sense to people?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. Let me write that down and people can thumbs up on the doc to show that. Came to some consensus here. We've got about 38 minutes left and nothing else on the agenda. So if anyone wants to chat about something, let us know.
Yeah, maybe this is going to be discussed in the next meeting. But just wanted to understand the the lifetime of the virtual services, given that there is some drive towards the gateway API. So just wanted to understand from the perspective of people who are using virtual services and which is widespread in their systems. So how what kind of urgency should they be showing? And second question is, if let's say we decide to move to Gateway API today, is it readily available, and then does it have all the features which virtual services and any other API which we are going to migrate to Gateway is all the features already there in the Gateway API?
Yep. Yeah, I can answer this. So one thing just to clarify up front, since this gets a lot of people, is that there's often seen as this view of you either use all gateway APIs or all the Istio ones, and there's nothing in between. I don't think that's really the case. Mixing and matching, like really gateway provides the core gateway and the routes, and Istio provides gateway and virtual service.
Yeah.
Those, technically there's some mixing and matching you can do. It's kind of wonky. So those, I think it's good to keep entirely like one or the other. But all the rest of the Istio policies work just fine with those two gateway API resources. So like authorization policy, for example, there's nothing even really started about authorization in gateway API, but it's totally fine because you can use Istio authorization policy with the gateway API resources and everything's fine. Destination rule is another example that also works with the gateway API. Destination rule is slightly different because there is some real ongoing work in the gateway API to actually build out some of the features there. Like there's a backend TLS policy that does the TLS stuff. But there's also many other parts of destination rule that haven't begun in gateway API. So that's one thing. The other thing was, is there urgency? I would say not really. Like the Istio APIs are not going to go away. I won't say ever, especially on a recorded call, but not anytime soon. Like in Kubernetes, for example, there's replication controller. Most people haven't heard of it because no one uses it and it's ancient. But it's V1, it's stable, it's been around for many years. I think we'll see the same with virtual service, where ideally, most people are off it, no one cares about it. Maybe it's barely, it's like kind of hidden in the documentation into some obscure corner. That will take a very long time, just to be clear. But I don't see any need for us to remove it. We know how much pain we previously had removed in authorization API in Istio 1.5, and it caused a ton of pain. So, and that was made back then. Istio is a lot bigger now. So anyhow, we probably won't remove it. That being said, a lot of the newer stuff is going on in the Gateway API. A lot of the ecosystems moving towards the Gateway API in terms of documentation, examples, integrations with things like external DNS, cert manager, whatnot. So there's still benefits to move, but it's more of a carrot versus a stick.
All right.
And
So I mean, in summary, you're saying that in summary, you're saying that there is no urgency which we should be showing, and then the second thing is that these things will continue to exist, right? Like very unlikely that they will be removed because they have been around since what the early stages of Istio, right? So a lot of companies are already having a widespread use of these, and it's kind of annoying for them if we remove it.
yeah.
All right.
Just to be clear as well, it's also annoying for developers because internally we translate Gateway API into virtual service. So it's not even like, there's always the temptation as a developer to go remove some old legacy stuff. It would be very hard for us to do that. So it's a second line of reassurance.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, the last thing you had though was the feature parity. It's in many ways because of the fact that you can use the Istio APIs with it. That covers a lot of stuff. So I don't think that we will get to a point in the next 5 years where every part of the Istio API can be done in pure Gateway API. I don't think that's a goal even, right? I think it's kind of expected that Istio will always have extensions. The trickiest thing right now is the things that are in virtual service, but not an HTTP route, because those don't compose. You can't have like the CORS policy of virtual service, but then use an HTTP route. Like there's no way to attach those. So there's a small or medium, depending on your perspective, number of features in virtual service that aren't an HTTP route. The two big ones for a long time was retries and timeouts. Timeouts just got merged to GA. Retries is very close. But there's some other stuff, like CORS was one I just said. Let's see, they have mirroring now. I don't know. I'd have to look. There's this medium list of things that are, the direct response is one that I've seen. So there's a few features specifically that aren't there that are, most of them are already progressing towards being added to the API in varying states. So
got it. Like one last question. So let's say in the future there is some new feature added to the Gateway API which is not there in virtual services. So like what's going to happen then? Like is Istio going to catch up and then have that feature in virtual services as well?
It depends on the feature. In some cases, like I said, we translate to virtual services internally. So in some cases, from a developer standpoint, it's easiest to do it that way. There's other things that's like how resources can attach to each other, like that don't even make sense necessarily to translate, that won't. Like for example, in HTTP route, you attach to a service. In virtual service, you attach to a host name. Like we're not porting that model over, I don't think. Usually there's not new features in the Gateway API because Istio already has a ton of features. Usually it's just different ways to express the same features. So it could. It's really a case-by-case basis, I would say. Like one example of one coming up is like, there might be a retry budget where you can say like 5% of retries or 5% of requests can retry or something. That might be something we would add to the API, for example.
All right.
No commitments, just as a
I think that makes sense. Thanks. And John, for the record, there was one IstioCon I remember where the Gateway API had come up, and there was a question asked. You were presenting, and there was a question that, "Are we going to deprecate virtual services?" And on record, you did say, "Yeah, it's very unlikely." So yeah, we are on the same.
It's good I haven't changed my mind in a few years.
Yeah.
It's uncommon.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else people want to discuss? If not, we can 30 minutes back, and then we got the ambient meeting coming up at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Cool. See you all.